Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you are all safe and sound and well where you are. My name is Alex Villasante. I am the program manager at the Highlights Foundation. I'm coming to you from Southeast Pennsylvania on the traditional and contemporary lands of the Lenni Lenape people. Welcome to our free HF Gather. Here comes summer, reading, swimming, and gathering. I'm so excited about this conversation where we get to jump into summer with hearts full of joy, with family to connect with. I didn't even mention this, but food to eat, and with wonderful books all about that summertime vibe. Before I turn things over to Valerie, Jack, Emily, and Lucy, I want to quickly touch on a few notes. Closed captioning is enabled for this webinar and will also be included in the recording of tonight's event. All registrants will get a link to that recording. As this is a webinar, we unfortunately can't see your video or hear your audio, but we can see you in the chat and in the Q&A feature. Feel free to drop a comment, a high five, a eureka moment, where you're coming in from in the chat, but please place questions in the Q&A box. That way your question won't get lost in the chat when it is time to open up for Q&A. In the chat, in the Zoom, in all of the spaces where we gather with the Highlights Foundation, we ask that you are respectful in your engagement with us and that you join us with no hate, no harm, and no harassment of any kind. I'm going to see if I can do two things at once. It's always hard. But I'm going to drop a link in the chat, which is a link to our community standards for those of you who are a little new to the Highlights Foundation, or for those of you who wish to read a little further about our commitment to creating safe and inclusive spaces. So let me just pop that into the chat to everyone. Yay, I did it. Okay. So now, enough of all that good stuff. I'm going to kick it off this summertime celebration with by passing it over to educator, faculty member, picture book author, all around awesome person, Valerie Bolling, who I have been at summer camp with. Is it three times now?
It's been two, and this year it's Black Voices. So I
Yes,
won't
but I
be
want you
doing
back.
it. Yes, I
You,
want to come back.
you
Yeah.
are summertime, you are summer camp material. So please, Valerie, introduce us to this summertime fun.
Sure. So, first of all, I want to point out for those of you who may not know that May is National Swim Safety Month. So, not only are we gearing up for summer, but it's the perfect time to have a gather about swimming and about our picture books that are all about swimming. And I want to I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing myself and my other friends here because I want us to be able to have a conversation and have enough time for you to ask questions. So Alex is going to be kind enough to drop the links to our websites in the chat so you can find out more about us. But I thought it might be interesting for you to see how this idea came together. When my book, Together We Swim, and each of us will hold up our books when we're talking. When my book came out last August, I noticed that there were other swimming books that were already out. Jack's book, and Lucy's book. And then later, also, I believe in August, if I'm correct, Emily had a swimming book come out. And so I thought that I wanted to connect with these other creators who had all written books about swimming. And then when I heard that, Highlights does gathers, I thought it would just be fun for us to connect and get together and talk about our books. And so that's what we're going to do together. And Jack and Lucy are actually author illustrators, which is really exciting. And Emily and I have just written the words. I shouldn't say just. We are authors, and we've been fortunate to be paired with amazing illustrators. So to start off, I'd like each of us to share just a I know it's a typical question, but I do think people want to know where the idea for our particular books came from. In other words, the story behind the story. And also, if there is maybe your own swimming story that you want to share, particularly if there's a connection between that and your book. So I'm going to start with you, Lucy. And you can hold up your book as well.
Hi. So my name is Lucy Ruth Cummins, and I'm an author and illustrator. And my swimming book is Our Pool, which came out in May 2023. Our Pool is about my neighborhood pool. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm in the courtyard outside my apartment building because if you live in an apartment with an 8.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, there's no quiet place. So this book is about our community swimming pool in my neighborhood in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And the reason I came to make it was I have had a career as an art director in picture books for 22 years. And so when I have an idea, my ideas always channel their way into books. It's the way I think. And so I was at the swimming pool with my then probably 3 or 4 year old son, and I was kind of looking around, and my artist eye kind of noticed all the interesting things that were happening around the water and all the different people who were there. And it immediately felt like a book. And so I started making notes and started coming up with this concept for this particular book. And so over the course of 2.5-ish years, I developed this book and this story about our neighborhood pool.
Thank you. And obviously you also, have a swimming story. So there's the story behind that, but there's also the fact that you're a swimmer, that you enjoy the neighborhood pool, you go there with your family. And so I often talk about, especially when we or speaking to children, they often want to know, where do ideas come from? And I often say ideas can come from anywhere, and they are often we find them just in our setting, just by looking around in our environment. And clearly that's what you did. So thank you for sharing that. What about
Thank
you,
you.
Jack? And
Thanks,
don't
Valerie.
forget to hold up your book.
Yeah. So this is my book, When You Can Swim. And what Lucy was saying and what you were saying just now, both parts of it were really interesting, because this book was 100% inspired by just being in the environment that it's about, which is swimming in nature. But unlike Lucy's book, I actually had the opposite experience of knowing that it was a story that I would write about right away. Instead, I was so I'm someone who is an adequate swimmer, not a very confident swimmer, but I have friends and family who love swimming out in nature, be that at the pool, not the pool, at the lake, or at the beach, or in the river. And I would often be part of these, outings, hiking and camping, but I wouldn't be the most avid swimmer. So a lot of the times I spend time actually out of the water and sketching and writing little poems or jotting down little notes about my environment, which is something I do anyway as an author illustrator. And at a certain point, when I was looking at my sketchbook or my notebook, I started to realize I had all these things about swimming. And it had been months and months before that I had been collecting this stuff, over one particular summer, actually. So it took me a very long time to realize that I had been working on this book unwittingly. And by the time I realized it, I had most of the scenes and a lot of the words to go along with it as well.
Wow. That is just incredible. And that, again, is another writing tip and illustration tip to just keep your notebook, right? As ideas come to you, you jot them in. Sometimes you may even forget about them, but when you take time to look at what you've jotted, whether they're words or illustrations, you never know what you might find there. And so the idea that you had really a book that was in those notes is
Right.
just incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Emily? You're muted, Emily, I think. Yes. Is it just me? Is anyone else having difficulty hearing Emily?
Here, you can't hear me
Okay,
okay?
now I can hear you. I can hear you now,
Very
Emily.
good.
Oh, sorry about that. So I was saying that I wrote I Will Swim Next Time over a number of years. I myself can barely swim, which may be a little odd. I grew up in the Gambia, West Africa, right by the beach, but I never learned to swim. I've always had this kind of healthy distance to the water where I appreciate it, love being in it, but don't know how to navigate it. But then when I became a mom, I took my own little one to the beach, and she stood there and refused to go in, no matter how much I coaxed. And I asked, "Well, what is it about the water?" And she said, "It just feels so loud." And I feel like she finally articulated what perhaps I had been feeling without really understanding. The Gambia has these massive crashing waves, so it is actually very, very loud. And in that moment, I made the decision that she would be different from me, that she would meet the water in different ways. And we would hopefully allow them to get better acquainted. So even though we visited to the Gambia, we actually lived in Sweden at the time, where we're very fortunate to have a lot of quiet lakes, calmer beaches, community pools. So over a successive years, we visited various waters, and without knowing, the story was writing itself in my head. And I think she was about 5 or 6 one day where we were sitting at an Airbnb that had a massive pool, and she just jumped right in, and I almost lost my lost my breath. But she just swam. And as she popped back up, she said, "Well, it feels just right." And that was when I knew the story was set. So that she is very much my inspiration, for the story, but in a way, she's a strong reflection of my own experiences with the water. I have since taken a swim class where I was heavily pregnant with my second child, determined to do better, but I'm still kind of holding on to the edge most of the time in a pool. That's as good as I can do for now.
Wow, what a story. But the fact that, I think it's so important for parents not to put their fears upon their child, right? Upon their children. So the fact that you said, I may not have the best relationship with water myself, but I don't want that for my daughter. I want my daughter
Mhm.
swim. I want my second child to swim. And you know what? I will try as well. You may never compete in the Olympics, right? But the fact that you are an example to show I can go into the water as well. And I think it's a perfect example of the fact that we can learn at any age. You can learn anything at any age. My husband as well grew up in Trinidad, never learned how to swim. And he took swimming lessons as an adult. Is he a great swimmer or a confident swimmer? No, but at least he can feel safe around water. And I think that's one of the messages I know I give. I don't know if you all do too. When I share my book with children, as I say, I want you to be safe. I want you to be safe around water. And that's why I want you to learn how to swim. And again, back to May is National Water Safety Month. Last Saturday, May 18th, was National Learn to Swim Day. So I think our books really do, even though we tell stories differently, there's clearly a connection. I'm going to very quickly tell the inspiration behind my story, and then I want to talk about the community in each of our books. My story is not at all an exciting one. I felt pushed to write this book. I had a 2-book deal. Together We Ride was the first book. It was called Bike Ride initially. And I knew that the publisher wanted a second book. And so I had come up with an ice skating book, and I was told, oh, that might be regional. And then I changed it to roller skating. I didn't have to change much. they weren't interested in that. And someone said, but you know, the publishing director thinks a book about swimming would be great. And I wasn't initially excited about the idea, though as a kid, you couldn't get me out of water. I did take swim lessons at the Y. I did go to camp every summer. So I was a very confident swimmer. I don't swim now so much. If I go into a pool, I like jacuzzis. And I like water aerobics. I'll do that. But I'm comfortable around the water, but I just, I'm not a lap swimmer these days. But so that's the story of mine. It's not oh, I was inspired, or oh, I had this story building. It was like, this is the story they want. Okay, I'll write it. So one of the things, as I was saying about our books, is there is this sense of community and family, really, in each of our books. And I want to know if there are certain ways that you thought about community as you were writing or illustrating, or if it was just something that maybe you weren't even necessarily so conscious of, but it was just such an integral part of your story that it ended up on the page. So I'll start with you this time, Emily.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you for sharing your story. That's
Yeah,
also an interesting
not
approach.
my sexy, exciting story, but anyway.
Yeah. So I think the community element in my story came through conversations with others who grew up next to me or around me in the Gambia, and realizing that so few of us swim. So I guess you don't really think about it when we're young, but that was kind of the norm. We don't learn to swim. We go to the beach every week, but we never learn the skill. And it might have to do with some of our social cultural norms, kind of the spirits we believe that live in the water, or just safety. Our parents don't want us in there. But I realized I knew maybe a handful of people who knew how to swim. And so it felt like the story needed to be written not just for my little one, but also for our community, to say something big and bold, like, we will swim next time. So the story actually just features the parent and the child. But I had a very strong intention that the book would hopefully connect to my community. And by my community as an African diasporan mom, I was very much focusing on my West African community, because back in Sweden, everyone is half fish. I think as soon as they're born, they go to the water, but also it's part of the school curriculum. So in grade school, there comes a point where there is an actual test to see whether you can swim from point A to point B safely, which I think is really brilliant, because then children understand that it's fun, it's lovely, but it's also a life skill, and
Yes.
one that's really important as you grow up. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And how has the book been received in the Gambia?
It's been really, really great, to have conversations around the books, because a lot of my peers haven't thought about the fact that we don't allow our children to swim or teach them to swim. And so just having the book and them having that conversation, or reading, or me reading at story time at schools, has created kind of conscious movements where we now go to the pool, because we're not brave enough to go swim in the ocean, but we now go to the pool and we take lessons. So it is a mini movement that's happening around me, where more of us are learning to swim, or allowing our little ones to learn to swim, because there's always, I'm too old. Is my body right for this? Will my
Right.
hair survive?
Right. Yeah, that's a Black thing,
There are other
folks.
aspects.
If you don't know, yeah, exactly. Wow. Gee, thank you for sharing all of that, Emily. And what about you, Jack?
Thank you, Emily, for sharing all of that. That was really interesting. What can I say about this from my book? I guess what I would share is also from a creator's side, for anyone who here is a fellow book creator or an aspiring creator, that for me, when I think about community in this book, it's almost like a solution or something you do with your story, or some way in which you convey it, can be very mundane and also very deeply meaningful at the same time. And it doesn't matter which one came first, you kind of arrive at the end having it all bound up in things that are both decisions made purely out of pragmatics, but also really meaningful. So what I mean by that is this book has, as I was saying before, each one was really inspired by just me seeing something out in nature. So this is Pebbly Beach, and this is, I'm just flipping randomly here. This is seeing kind of dragonflies fly about you as you're floating in a shallow lake. And so my first mundane, pragmatic problem to solve in this book was, it kind of felt like it could be told with just one character experiencing all these things, but I also thought that would kind of be kind of boring, seeing the same person kind of just go about nature page after page. So I started thinking about, who do I populate these pages with, almost as a director or a casting director who's casting different characters to play roles in each of these pages. Mm-hmm. And with that came this kind of whole snowballing of decisions of who I wanted to include, and how I wanted them to be included, who I wanted to give a starring role in this particular page, because I think it connected in some way with the text, or with a cultural element. And so it became a very meaningful exercise to me. And I'm certainly inspired by other books who have done this. One of them being the book Love, which was written by Matt de la Pena and illustrated by Lauren Long, which was really a free verse poetry kind of book without any characters. I think it was also in the second person, but each page, the illustrator Lauren Long kind of chooses a different vignette with different characters to populate it. And I was really inspired by that. So at the end of this whole exercise, I had come up with kind of an organic community that, if you read the book through as a reader, and you can imagine them all kind of a stone's throw from each other, kind of this organic community has arisen from the text, which from the impetus of it didn't really have any sense of character or who, the story is about.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's always so interesting to think about community. And one of the things I noticed is even the titles of our books. We have Emily's, which has first person, I will swim next time. We have yours, Jack, that says when you can swim. And then Lucy has our pool, and mine doesn't have words like that, but it does say together, right, which is a sense of community. Together we swim. And I just think that it's just an interesting connection between our books. Yeah, Lucy, let's hear from you.
I want to say that Emily's title is one of my favorite titles, because but I have framing a question. I feel like it's so kind of interesting, or like leaving it kind of open like that feels really like an invitation to pick a book up. I really like that about it. For our pool, it is a community book because it's our particular community. And so it was kind of like a no-brainer that I was just going to kind of work from observation. And the weird thing about being a city person, and I moved to Brooklyn 25 years ago in August. And when I came here, I came from being a person from central New York, where everybody had a yard and everybody's outdoor time was spent somewhat privately or with the invitation of friends. And then when I moved to New York City, it was everybody has an apartment or a smaller space, and then everybody shares community spaces. And it wasn't something that I had had as an experience as a kid. And then when I started raising my children in the city, I realized how essential those kind of public works projects are. And it's like from the playground to the library to the actual parks where you can have a picnic, and then swimming pools, which here in the summertime, it gets so hot that you would do anything to just get in water. And so I came to really love, as a mother, I really started to love what this was. It felt like a luxury thing that we've decided is essential, which is so wild to me because it's like you have to tell people that having fun is important. And now we know in the United States, it's like a public health crisis that children die from drowning. I saw a statistic today that was like 1 in 4, that it's like the leading cause of death among children, next to gun violence, which is horrifying. But that people not learning to swim means that there's a terrible outcome because the danger around water is so serious. And so having pools and community spaces like that is important because it helps kids survive water. And our pool in particular, I say our pool like I'm saying the title, but our swimming pool, and that's really how my children refer to it. It's like, we've got the biggest swimming pool in the whole world, but it has a 0 grade entry, which means if you're a little one, it slopes down into the water gradually. You can sit in an inch of water, or you can stand to your waist. And just even before you can swim, just being able to get close to water. And even when you talk about being at the beach, I know that intensity of waves, and when you're a little one, looking at it means there's no getting close to it. It's not inviting. But the nice thing about saying this community pool is important is you can inch into it, you can get comfortable at your own pace, and we're saying it's important to learn that. And it's interesting when you're talking about Sweden having like the priority of teaching swimming. It's a thing that they've talked about in the United States as being important because children are dying, and it's so important. But it was interesting because my impetus for making the book was to celebrate this thing I loved, and I loved with my family, and I loved in my neighborhood. And then as you make a book like this, you kind of, your eyes open wider to what the larger themes are and the larger meaning behind things like public pools. So it was both like an exercise in wanting to draw a lot of different angles on swimming, which Jack destroyed me at. Everything that he drew in his book, I can't look at because it's so much more interesting. But then it became a deeper thing where like I feel that urgency now, and I hope that with a book like this, it gives you another time to get comfortable with water and the process of getting in water, and maybe that's one step closer to safety, which is kind of a, I don't know, it feels important in that way.
Yeah, it's definitely important. And there are a couple things you said that I want to, pick up on. One is you talked about the number of children who die each year, and whatever the numbers are, Black children are 7.5 times more likely. The numbers are 7.5 times that for Black children, according to the CDC. So it is a public health issue. And then the other thing is access, right? Everyone should have access. And your public pool, I'm assuming, Lucy, when you go there, is there a fee that you pay?
There is 0 fee, and they give a free lunch. It's,
Wow,
I mean,
free
it's one of
lunch.
Oh,
those things where you're like, wow, you really mean this is important? And I want to say about the free lunch, the free lunch isn't, you have to ask and you feel sheepish about it. It's if you're a person who appears under 18, you are handed a lunch unless you decline it, which also solves a hunger issue in the summer when children aren't at school. I get really goosebumpy talking about it because it hits so many angles what this thing is doing in our neighborhood.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I did, when I asked the question, I had a feeling it was free, but the fact that the lunch comes with it and in the way that you said is just amazing. And so there are so many things, parks and swimming pools and libraries. There are so many free programs. There are so many options for people that everyone, I believe, should take advantage of and should know about. And of course, again, if we add a little history lesson here, these places were not always open to everyone. And even now, sometimes, depending upon where you go, certain people may get side-eyed, so not every place is always welcoming to everyone, but everyone should have access. Everyone should have fun. And particularly during the summer, kids are out of school. They need to be going to libraries to get books and for summer programming. They need to go to pools. They need to go to parks. So just so important. I just want to point out one thing about community in my book, and it really has to do, and if you all are able to pin me, because I really want you to see this up close. This is my amazing illustrator. Well, I don't own her. Kaylani Juanita is an amazing, talented artist. And let me show you what she does for community. If you look closely and you see who's in the pool, and I'm trying to see so I can, that's one. And then on this page, I don't know if I'm holding it so you can see well enough. It's hard for me to kind of, you know what, let me take my own advice and see if I can pin myself and if that works. No, I'm not seeing it, but I don't know if you can see it up close, but the idea is that she
That's
has
good.
people from different backgrounds, people you may not normally see in the water. So it truly is a sense of community and a sense that the pool is for everyone. Can you see this one?
Mm-hmm.
So I just like that, to me says so much about community, and that truly pools are for everyone, regardless of the type of swimsuit you may wear, or, you know, physical challenge that you may have, or, you know, maybe you're not skinny, you know, we come in all body types. So I wanted to show that, you know, those pictures as a way of, you know, showing how Kaylani built community in the pool. So one of the things I'd also like to ask you about is, there's this, and I was kind of touching on it again earlier when I was talking about access, but there's still this sort of idea in picture book representation that BIPOC kids belong in urban settings, and they are there, and that's certainly fine. But sometimes people think it's not usual to see Black and brown kids in nature, either camping or biking at the beach, etc. And I'm wondering if either that was something you were thinking about when you were creating your books, or maybe if you weren't thinking about it at the time, maybe you just, you know, maybe looking at your books now or looking at our books collaboratively, maybe there's a thought that you have about that. So I'll start with you, Jack.
Yeah, that was certainly something I thought a lot about while I was making the book. And I echo what Lucy said earlier when she said that it starts off being a book that you're writing about one thing, and the number of concerns and thematics and kind of issues that are kind of encompassed by this one activity of swimming and in a public place, it really started to become more than just about swimming. And I certainly was thinking a lot about it. I was reading a lot of the same statistics that you were bringing up in when I was turned on to the issue of access and disparities in Black and brown and other kids of colors learning to swim, and the drowning rates from that. I was also becoming aware through making the book of how swimming, and especially public pools, were arenas of the civil rights movement, and how they were kind of grounds for of conflict, and how there's a history embedded within it that even as we get to celebrate it now, there's a while I was writing this book was realizing that this wasn't a book where I can really speak to all of those things at the same time, nor was it really the right venue for me to just be spitting facts at the reader, whether it's, you know, the age group that I'm writing for, but also because it's ultimately a book about my experience swimming and the things I wanted to share out of my excitement for finding things in nature. So I think all of that was, it just fueled the decisions that I made about the book. Like I was saying before, it ended up being, this book. It gave it a tone of being an aspirational book for at least two ways. I mean, one is just the fact that if you're not someone who can swim and you're picking up this book, it's aspirational in the sense that it's showing that once you can swim, you can go to all these different places and check out all these great sights in nature. And at the same time, the book depicts kids of color and also of different body types and disabilities in the water. So it's aspirational in that way. And I kind of like the fact that they were kind of bound up in one. It's not very clear that these are two different things, but they're one and the same, that once you learn to swim, this whole world is opened up. And there's no clear line of when the issue of learning to swim begins and where all those other things are kind of brought into the picture. And the other thing that I did with the book that was influenced by all the research that I was just talking about was that I still didn't feel that it was a book where I would share all of those things in a very factual way, but I felt that I should also share my background and, you know, the history of swimming through my mother's generation and my grandmother's generation, and I just shared the story that way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I love the back matter in your book as well. So absolutely. Thank you. Emily, what about you? We're not hearing you right now.
To come. Is
We
it
can
there?
hear
Can you hear
now.
me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So with this book specifically, the voice was ours. It was my family's. And so in the images that the lovely Matilda Rucha created for us, she's a Swedish illustrator who did some really incredible watercolors for us. It felt important that the child represented the voice. And particularly on Swedish bookshelves back when the book came out. So it came out in Swedish first, and then it came out in English a couple of years later. There was a true vacuum where children of books that featured children that look like ours. And like you said, especially children within, it's not just nature, it's just children experiencing joy in everyday life. So beyond even kind of certain settings. So it felt important that the child reflected our voice. So we actually spend a lot of time thinking about the hair, how curly, what would it look like when the child gets in the water? Would it get longer? Does it curl up? Because I felt like this book was going to stand out in a very significant way in the context of Sweden and then later on in the world. In all my other books that I've written, I do emphasize the importance of inclusion in terms of the bodies that are shown, the abilities. But for this specific book, I would say my main thing was that the child represented reality, that they were not stick thin, even though some children are, that the mom was a little rounder, that it was okay that she had shorter hair. I was trying to subtly address some of the stereotypes that were persistent in our context. And it's a different experience because you're working with an illustrator. And when I work with someone else on a book, I feel like we're co-parenting. And so I feel it's important that they also bring in their words and their perspectives and what's important to them, not just how I envisioned it. And in fact, that's how the book ended up representing Um, some of the waters that are in the book are waters that are more familiar to Matilda than me because she is ethnically white Swedish. Um, and whilst the water in the front, that giant ocean, that's more me. So it's a beautiful collaboration where the reader gets to hear my voice and see my part of the co-parenting together with Matilda. And yet I feel like we were able to hit the mark in terms of the representation that I felt was really, really important for us to see. And I would say, I'll just wrap it up by saying that I became a writer as my tool, as my outlet to address a lot of the social justice issues and the racism that we experience. So before those experiences, I never even considered writing. So I'm very intentional with every story that I write because it has a purpose. It's not something that sadly, it's not something that I do just because I enjoy it. If not, I would keep those stories to myself. I feel like they need to go further. They need to be part of our community because they serve such an important purpose.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I love the idea of author illustrator when you and I don't have the gift that Lucy and Jack do, where we can illustrate our own stories. So this idea of co-parenting, because we do call it our book baby, right? So this idea
Mm-hmm.
of co-parenting is a concept that I really like. So thank you for sharing all that. And also being intentional. Yes, when you have certain lived experience and as you say, writing these books is an act of social justice, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so absolutely. Lucy, what about you? And I love, Lucy's got, Lucy may be white, but the kids in the book we got lots of black and brown kids because that's who's
We
in
got
the name.
lots of different kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about it. Like, I kind of thought when I was making the
Oh,
book,
look at
because I
that
was kind of
picture.
approaching it from like thinking of it as just like an artist and thinking, this looks good. Like this, what I'm seeing is beautiful, and I want to see if I can represent it. And that's like strictly how I'm thinking. But I'm also like, I'm filling the pool kind of like a documentarian. It's like it's what I've seen. And so there are no real leaps. It's really like I was describing the process of writing it at one point and of choosing the pictures and scenes as being like on Sesame Street, where they used to do like little bits of snippets of documentary. And it would just be like, here's something we can show you from a couple different angles. And here are a bunch of kids doing the same thing or something like that. And I always loved that as a kid. I always dug in, and maybe it was the contrast between the rest of the show. Um, but I wanted my book to kind of feel that way, where you will be like, hey, look, here we all are, and here's what we're up to. But by necessity, it's just actually who I swim with. And so that's who's in the book. But there's a lot more neon in my book than there is in my real pool because I like neon, but people are not wearing neon to the swimming pool anymore. I don't know why. Trends change.
Yes, they do. I remember lots of neon in the 80s. But it's been so wonderful to hear each of you talk about your book. Some of the things you shared I knew, but there were things that I didn't know. We haven't had, this kind of conversation with each other. So I'm just so glad that we had the opportunity to do that. I think at this point, I'm going to welcome Alex back because I want to be sure that we have enough time. I haven't been monitoring the chat, so I don't know if there are questions there. If there aren't, I'm sure Alex will have a couple of questions. I know my Alex.
Well,
He
my
may
first
have-
comment, my
yeah.
first comment is neon never actually went out of style. That
Yeah.
is false. If you look in my closet right now, you would see a couple of choice pieces. I'm just saying it's never not a neon day. Hey, what a wonderful conversation. We do have a few questions that I want to get to really quick. Well, not really quickly, but I think that we can do that. One of the questions was, what age readers are your books for? And how did that influence plot and language?
Okay. I'll actually start because I didn't respond to the last question. I think, and obviously I'm going to have my conversation partners jump in. I know that most picture books tend to get an automatic label of 4 to 8. Sometimes it might be 3 to 6 or something like that, but it's generally that's if you look our books up, it's around that age group. So I don't know. I think when you're writing a picture book, you know that you're writing for young children. And so you keep that in mind with the language that you choose, the words that you choose. I don't know that our stories have big plot. I mean, I think, mine and Emily's have this plot of learning how to swim and when are you going to learn how to swim? I mean, Lucy's is, just the enjoyment at the pool, and Jack is, when you can swim here, look at, when you can swim. I love it how it's all the nature shots, and then at the end it's like here's the starting point of the pool. But yeah, if you feel free, any of you can jump in and respond. Maybe just
I was going
raise
to
your
say I
hand so
would
we
have
don't speak over each
I,
other. Oh, sorry. Go, Lucy. Yep.
and my flap says 4 to 8, but I was going to say that I don't instinctually know. When I start kind of writing something, like I would want the word choice to be, I want it to communicate, but I don't think I ever kind of let it stop me from telling the story. I was thinking about Valerie, how spare yours is, and how, in a way, that's kind of big. Like I don't know. Anyhow, I guess 4 to 8 is correct, but I would not have been able to guess that without looking at the
Mm.
graph.
And
Yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
do you want to go first, Emily?
No.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say that I'm decidedly a non-expert at age range. I go, I'm aware of the same things that Valerie and Lucy you mentioned, which is the age on the flap, but I often will read a book to one class, so let's say grade ones and twos, and I guess flying over their heads is the wrong way of saying it, but it won't capture their interest in the same way, and I will feel that it's kind of like an age mismatch with the vocabulary, and then I would read it to someone who's 4 years old but in a different setting. Maybe it's three kids at a library in a more intimate setting, and they'd be captivated. And all the experiences I've had doing school and library visits just kind of confused the matter more than it has really clarified anything. I So I really just end up writing whatever I want to write and letting somebody else tell me if I cross any age lines. And even then, I'm a little bit stubborn because when I was going through the editing process for this book, previous to my publishing, I just mean when I was kind of editing it and showing friends and mentors, that kind of thing. There were a couple words like amphitheater and tannin soaked that consistently got noted for being advanced for the age group. And I just said, well, isn't there that whole thing where like the parents read the books to the kids and the kids don't know what it is, you can just tell them. So I just really liked the word, so I stuck with them, and it ended up making it into the book. And I'm going to riff off that and say that one of the comments I got was actually for the end of the book, where it says one of the penultimate line is, when you can swim, I'll take you there. So I'll take you to all these places. And throughout the book it has been, when you can swim, I or we will do this, or I will take you here and we will do that. So it ends with, when you can swim, I'll take you there. And I got multiple instances of feedback where, because of this convention in children's writing, where we focus a lot on a child's agency to do something on their own, to not have a grown-up solve their problem. The recommendation for me was to change it to, when you can swim, these are the things you can do. When you can swim, we can go together, to kind of turn the agency more towards the child. And I just kept thinking, what kid doesn't like hearing that their parent or grown up or whoever is going to take them somewhere? Like, who doesn't want to hear, I'm going to take you to Disneyland, or I'm going to take you to the mall, I'm going to take you to buy candy. So I think I'm going off on a tangent, but I think it was also an indication of age, because at a certain age, let's say 4 to 8 or 3 to 7 or whatever, um, I think enveloping a child in love and care and, I'm going to take care of you is absolutely warranted. And I think despite amphitheater and tannin soaked and all those stupid words I chose, I think the feeling I was trying to convey was for that young audience, of an audience who is at an age where they really respond well to someone telling them, once you learn to swim, um, we're going to go there together, and it's not just something you go off and do by yourself.
That's beautiful, Jack. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emily, did you want to jump in as well? I thought you might have had a comment there. I don't want to cut you off before we go to the next question. Can't completely hear you. Sorry.
This answer was so perfect. I think I'm happy to leave it there. I'm also a nonconformer. The stories
Glad to
for
hear it.
whoever it suits.
While you were talking, I was thinking I don't write picture books, but I know quite a few teachers who use picture books to teach creative writing to older kids, to middle school and high school, because it's really such a wonderful teaching tool on a lot of ways of like structure. And actually, we have a question about structure, which is, how do you decide on the structure of your books? Emily, do you want to start, since you were Jack sort of
Sure.
answered your
No. So with structure, I struggle with structure. I feel like the story tells me the structure. And so when I write, I tend to lay out the idea, the characters, what I see, and then when I'm happy with a certain version of a draft, then I share it with a publisher who then says, maybe you need a little more structure. So I think that's a little difficult for me because although I've been writing for quite a few years now and I've got a few books, I still often feel like the story is in the driving seat as opposed to me being in the driving seat, as in the story needs to be told in a certain way. And I learned to shift and kind of adapt and think about language and think sometimes about age range of readers. But I really feel like structure is something a little bit like the age thing, where it's a convention that comes from maybe the publishing side or the way certain stories or the majority of stories have been enjoyed. But I love the unconventional. I love wordless books. I love books that make you hop when you read, and those lack structure in a conventional manner. And perhaps that's why I struggle with structure. Sorry, that's not a very helpful answer, but it's an honest one.
We love that. Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in on scope on structure?
I noticed that we're getting close to time, so if there are maybe other questions, I don't think we all have to respond to each of
Sure.
them, maybe.
Well, I did want to very quickly read out two comments that you might not have seen, because they're lovely. From our friend Carol, we have thank you to all panelists for including disabled folks in your discussion of the diversity in your books, and to Jack Wong for using the word disabled. Thank you for that. Thank you, Carol. And Susanna also said, I appreciate your comment. I'm a super beginner. Welcome, Susanna, writer. And I feel like I tend to feel super limited when thinking about the age range. So not letting that stop me would be nice for her to hear. So that was wonderful. And I think as we are getting close, maybe we have one more question, which would be, this was an earlier question that was dropped in. Hair, and you touched on this a little bit, but maybe it's more of a comment. Hair has become a big barrier for us as the girls get older, they don't want to deal with their hair or be the only one in the pool with a cap. So I think that speaks a little bit to what you were saying, Valerie, about Black and brown kids being even seen, portrayed in, I know on the cover of your book, Mama's wearing a cap, and normalizing that, way of being in the pool and still having all of the things that you need. So I think that's a lovely comment as well. So thank you for that question. And our final question, maybe we can get an answer from everyone before we say goodnight, is apart from the word swimming or swim, in one word, what is your story about? I love these questions because they make you think. Putting you on the spot a little bit. But one word that your book is about.
I guess I would say neighborhood.
Yeah, I love that. I stumped you, Valerie. I'm sorry.
I know, no, because I have all these words. I have to go with at least two. You can't give me just.
Rule breaker. You're just
I
like
have to.
Emily with the rule
Hey,
breaker.
I led the discussion. I organized this. Thank you for
There you
letting me do it, Alex, so I can break the rule. So I will say joy and perseverance.
Those are good. See, you can get away with this because those are very good words. Anybody else want to chime in?
I'm stumped.
Yeah, it's not easy.
So I would say being brave, because for me, being brave is acknowledging the fear and being persistent in your efforts to find coping mechanisms that work for you. And yeah, so being brave.
I love that. I love that. Well, I want to thank you all for being here, for kicking off our summertime fun, for sharing your stories and sharing your beautiful artwork as well. And I just think that we at the Highlights Foundation, our mission is all about kids and representation for kids and empowering kids to be their best selves. I want to just remind people, if you didn't already know, that Valerie is going to be on campus with us this summer at the Black Voices in Community Retreat. I'm going to pop a link to that if anyone is interested in checking that out. And we have a couple of other upcoming on campus. If you haven't been to the retreat center, as Valerie knows, not only is the food great, but everything else is great.
Everything. You don't want to miss out. If you have
great
the opportunity to go, you want to go. Yes.
And if you have the opportunity to hang out with Valerie, definitely go.
Thank you. I would love to hang out with you.
Let's do it. We also have a working retreat, lyrical picture books and poetry with just some of the loveliest faculty that we have, wonderful people, award-winning authors and illustrators, and just awesome faculty. And then in November, I know that's beyond summer, and I don't want to think beyond summer. I've gotten here to summer. I don't want to think about fall. I just found my shorts in the closet. I don't want to, but we do have to think ahead a little bit. We have another working retreat, picture book authors and illustrators in November. That's with Darcy Pattinson, Leslie Helikowski, and Sarah Gomez-Woolley, our own Sarah. So all our friends, if you have any questions about anything that you've seen tonight, any questions about our upcoming events, do reach out. But I just wish you the very best night. And I want to thank you again for joining us, and have a lovely evening. Thank you, everybody.